It is November 28th. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I had an amazing Thanksgiving. Thanks, Zane.
Um, I was hoping we could get introductions at the beginning of the meeting. That way we could sort of learn everybody's intentions here. Lav and Jay and Alex. Jay, your name is dot 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 for me because of the streamer mode, but the oh, let me open up the chat. Hello, Lav. So we do have the meeting notes here at the link that I just put into the chat. If anybody wanted to take a look at that and add anything that anybody wants to talk about, if so, feel free. Um, Otherwise, we've got a couple of things here. The first thing was discussing supporting auth in the agent protocol. I think in Tyndall, Nick would be around here in a minute to probably comment on that as well. So might hold on for a couple of minutes there. But the other thing was the JS and TypeScript client. Right now we only have a Python client, but we do have a TypeScript SDK as well as the Python SDK. And I was wondering, or we were wondering, if anybody would be interested in working on the TypeScript client to go along with the TypeScript SDK. Um,
Zane, I think it might help to mention that you are having office hours in case people are interested in working on, the TypeScript SDK, TypeScript client. They can, reach out to you to get an office hour with you to kind of work on this
yes,
together.
yeah, please let me know.
Yeah.
Let me know if you want to talk about anything, and I would be happy to sit in the lounge or the study room channel here and discuss code stuff and the stream things and talk about anything.
So there is so separately, so I'm gonna paste this link here. There is an existing issues associated with this already, and someone did create a very simple client. So maybe the task is not, instead of creating a new uh, TypeScript client, the task is more just adapting to kind of a more modern version of it. So take a look at that. And I'll post it in the chat too. Um, Take a look at, I believe, don't remember the name, but someone, Chap, Al Chaplinsky, created a simple client.
Ah, that's right. He was working on that. Okay.
Um,
Would it
it
be
may be.
useful? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, no, you go ahead.
Would it be useful to have a Java or .NET client? I think that's what you were about to talk about, right?
Uh, Jay, do you mind talking a little bit more about that? Or
Oh, sorry. I was I was on mute. Yes. Well, I know there's a huge community that works on backend building Java and .NET, and if we're looking to use some of the agents on the backend side of apps, I believe it would be a good uh, a reason to have sort of a protocol or a client that can work with Java and with .NET. I was thinking about it.
Just the client or the SDK as well? Would it are people building AI agents in Java as much?
I'm not sure right now. I'm just giving my perspective because I I work a lot in backend and my main language is Java, and
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of AI apps building only in Python and JavaScript, and I don't understand why there is no not an SDK that can interact with Java or .NET. That is only what I was thinking.
I think that sounds great. The more available clients there are, or even SDKs, if people are building agents in Java in the Java ecosystem, the better. Clients for sure need to be there. I think not only for back end work, but also I think there's plenty of front end facing applications that could be built in Java that would use the agent protocol. So absolutely. Would it be useful to have a Java or .NET client to answer your question? Absolutely. Um, we can get something going on that. Java is definitely not my main language. It's but I'm fully willing to help out and support, and we could set up a meeting sometime to talk more about it if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great. I want to first take a look at some of the documentation and see how can we begin working on it.
Of say that one more time.
I want to see. I want to take a look at the documentation and see how we can build it in Java, and like I have a first idea of how to build it, and then we can meet up if you want.
Yeah, that sounds good. Right now, I think the TypeScript client was built using one of the Open API generators. So that's probably what we would do for the Java client as well, so that we could always update it to the spec, most likely. Um, but yeah, we could take a closer look at that as well. That is, I think that's a great idea.
Great. And I was thinking that these days about how we can address security issues in the AI agent. I was thinking about how can we prevent getting uh, prompt injections on the agent, like make the agent do something he's not designed for. I don't know if this kind of issue is on the scope of the agent protocol or is outside the scope. What I was thinking about like we have injections in regular applications, and how can we prevent getting injections in AI-based applications, like changing on prompts and bad uses of our agents.
Okay. It might be a little bit out of the scope of the agent protocol, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Sasha, what do you think?
I think it would be if we have infinite resources that we would, obviously this is an important issue that we would love to think about, but right now it is not front and center. Mostly we are kind of developing the agent protocol so that it can be as versatile as possible. That's kind of like the top goal is to allow more and more agents to be able to use agent protocol and kind of getting it more popularized. And so I think some of the security prompt injection is kind of taking kind of a backseat in terms of the importance level. I know that we kind of we're talking about like I think prompt injection, these type of things are more kind of tasks that agents need to pay attention to, and not necessarily the agent interface. And the way I think about it is more just like AI agents need to be more secure, and not necessarily the interface of course can expose certain issues behind within the agent, but I think the more important piece in terms of security is the agent as opposed to the interface, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. It
Yes,
does. I
yes,
think
makes sense.
it's also in the context of progression for protocols and in the security space there for prompt injections and things like that. I think more often throughout history it's been, you know, getting adoption to be the bigger focus and then focusing on the next thing. So it would make sense to just keep it in mind and be able to write any findings you have about prompt injection that are common commonplace. That way we could identify that at a later date, but it probably wouldn't become a priority until there's more adoption of the protocol.
Yeah, I want to say if you guys have ability to like write a blog post about it, I'm more than happy. So I'm thinking about introducing like a blogging channel on our site. And so obviously like any submissions are welcome to especially you guys are practitioners, kind of like writing about like what is good practices within the AI engineering industry. And so if you can like consolidate the notes and write a blog post, more than happy to feature on the site.
Yeah, that would be good too because the a lot of the site is in Markdown, so it can really easily go from GitHub or Discord over to the format of the site and get that going. Really straightforward. Um, it's a good idea.
Sounds great for me.
Um, Now that we have a little bit of time, so before we go into the next part, Zane, do you mind going over the issues 39 about the info endpoint to get agent info, that issue? Kind of there were a lot of notes that's written on this particular issue, and then there is this like discussion towards the end where Caspar just kind of proposed doing the authentication as a part of the main protocol as opposed to an agent extension. Sorry, as opposed to the protocol extension. So I'm curious to hear if you could kind of like share the history of this issue and kind of like talk about what you proposed and what other people proposed and why like what your stance on is in terms of like whether or not auth should be a part of the main protocol. That would be great.
Yes. So on the issue 39, this was about the info endpoint much more so than it was about the authentication, at least early on. This new conversation definitely uh, uh, talks about that, which is good, but I don't think that that's the necessarily the focus of the info endpoint. But the biggest thing with the info endpoint that I wanted to address was um, if I am writing a client that is supposed to dynamically connect to agents, right? Because that's one of the goals of the protocol is to be able to write systems that are interoperable across agents. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, the idea is to have that metadata there so that we would be able to identify the agents and manage them more appropriately. Um, and that is where that sort of schema view came from. And then there were some other things that we were discussing adding to the info endpoint as well because it's a really good place to store some other metadata such as schemas for additional configuration and things like that. And so this auth, so um, Caspar, who is not here at the moment, but is interested in the discussion of this, is proposing the common authentication methods and discussing putting those into something like a config options uh, in that info endpoint. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. If anything, that's a good place for it. Although I'd envision the auth endpoint or the auth concept existing in a different place, much more like a like an actual plugin of some kind, instead of a core element of the agent protocol. Um, So, but it could go either way. Both are good options because a lot of the authentication methods are pretty standard across the entire industry. So, um, I think that's
Uh,
my thoughts on
so
it.
so so personally, I just am in general confused in terms of we have in the info endpoint we have config options and we have additional properties. So
Hmm.
what is the difference between the two?
Additional properties.
Oh, they're not on the same level. It seems like additional properties is inside the config options.
Yes. So additional properties is actually an open API schema element that defines the properties of an object. So what this is doing in that schema, which if we were to, I had it once in the Swagger visualizer. Essentially, what that line is doing there is it's not a separate object. It's actually describing the object that would be the config options and stating it as an object with the properties of a type, default, description, and options. Um, and you can see from the example on the same tab hierarchy level down there where it says type string, default GPT-4, description, model for the agent steps to use, and options, which would be like GPT-4, GPT 3.5 Turbo, things like that. And the idea with that, so it's not a separate object. It's just defining that object as an example for the config options. And the config options was meant to be, whenever we were discussing it, a schema for the configuration, the additional input, if we were replacing the additional input with a config, as the terminology goes. So the way that would work is in the same context of building tools that are interoperable across agents. We would be able to take a client that has no knowledge of an agent whatsoever, no knowledge of its capabilities, and use these config options object that's in the info endpoint to be able to identify what the available um, uh, settings and tweaks there are for that agent. For instance, some agents could allow you to modify the temperature that you're using for the LLM or something like that. But some agents wouldn't, I mean, not every agent needs to go into extreme depth over the LLM usage of it. And sometimes agents aren't actually um, using an LLM in that way, if that makes sense. And so the idea is, if I wanted to do like a text to speech or speech to text model or something like that, then the config options would allow me to declare on the agent side what options are available for that model. If that Does that make sense?
Um, so basically the config option is provided for a input. It's showing us what options are available for the additional input array. Sorry, additional input dictionary.
Right.
Um, and so that's for both tasks and steps.
Right. Yeah, we had discussed in the
We kind of
past.
see that as for
Yeah,
everything,
kind of.
right?
I mean, anything. I think it wouldn't have a place in the artifacts because the artifacts, whenever you post an artifact, you're just uploading a file to the agent essentially. So the only things that really interact with the agent are the tasks and steps, because whenever you go through the process of, say, uploading a file with the artifact, which is the only other endpoint that you would have access to besides the info endpoint, um, uh, you after you upload the file, you would then create a new task or step with the artifact as a reference. So it would really just be the task and step that would have access to the config, the way that I see it.
I'd like to counter that um, with you could upload an artifact, which is something like a protected endpoint. I know this sounds ridiculous, and I think this is where maybe plugins become more useful. But you could have basically a derivative of an artifact, which like includes a MIME type, like a duration, or like metadata stuff, which could be
Right.
useful to the agent.
Which also
But
could
also, you could tell me that that's useless. And I would
Well,
agree.
and if the artifact can be extended, then you could change it from just file uploads to streams or something else like that. But that's also definitely something that I think the plugin system would handle more so than the config options. Especially because the
Yeah.
point of the config options was just to be one object in the info endpoint that would explain it for everything that that config options pertain to. And so if you had a separate one for the steps and the tasks, because tasks and steps are essentially the same, you know, you have the input and you have the additional input for both of them. And so the config options could relate to both of those, but not necessarily to the artifacts. That would be, you know, like we would have to do artifact options, which the same for the config options could be renamed to input options or something like that. Because the whole goal is to make it so that a client that has no knowledge of the agent has the ability to understand, okay, I can specify a model or something like that. So if you were building a UI that could interface with any agent, you'd be able to map that out into buttons or a text input or something along those lines. But yeah,
Um, so so I know Nick is kind of pro using auth. So okay, so I think like there's a couple issues with this uh config option situation, mostly because the way that it's like too in my opinion, it's too kind of like high level. So we're giving all tasks and steps this optionality, but what if it's not implemented on some of the I guess like the schema is um like in some of in one of the steps, what if it doesn't use an LLM, right? In the AI agent, let's say in one in the step they don't use an LLM, and so would that make sense to have, let's say in this case, we have just enable GPT-4. Um, would it make sense to kind of enable this config option for all tasks and step, or would it like does it make sense to offer granular control into in terms of like um um yeah like how would you guys think about
well, Nick
this
actually just put
particular
a message in there where the config options would be an array or an object that actually has tasks and steps in there for separating the two. But what you're talking about is having steps that are different from other steps, right? So there would have to be some level of classification between the steps or between the tasks so that you would know, you know, this is task A that has type A, and then this is task B that has type B, if that makes sense, or task type B, or you know, something along those lines. So then if we did that, if we had some way to classify that a step was a certain type of step, or same for tasks, then we could also, in the same vein that Nick just put the config option there for tasks and steps, um, we could also expand that out to have tasks and then task type A is
Pepper light
this.
ice. New York. Enjoy.
Say what, Nick?
Sorry, I'm gonna drive through. Life is hard.
Oh.
This is a terrible meeting time for me, but I try to make it. So something
um
like that.
Yeah, exactly. Where
I
we
said,
have tasks and then A would be the task type, and then steps there'd be C, which would be the task type, and so each one would have a different set of configuration in there, which would essentially be an array of options that have defaults and uh, that a client could use to identify that. But that's also extending
yeah,
the schema for the tasks and steps to have some sort of type classification.
uh
yeah.
Nick, I don't know what your thoughts on this. I don't think that we should have type classification for both task and step.
Hard disagree on that.
Do you
There
think
are
that we
some things that
should?
are
Oh my god.
yes. There are some things I want to do that are task specific, right? For
Mhm.
example, I may want to set a config option which is debug logging on or debug logging off, right? Like, and I may want to say whenever you execute a step that is of type, I don't know, code interpreter, right? This is a terrible example. We're going to go with it. Turn on debugging, right? Only for that specific step, right? I can see that being super useful.
I just think that the like the AI agents might not even know what task type it is and step type. Like how do we
Right. So the AI agent won't know that, but you'll configure basically each type. Like, so you can have a different type for steps, right? For example, a step could be a plan step, or like this is like these are going to be terrible examples, but a step could be a plan step or an execute step or a code step, right? Um, and those things could have a plan, code, and execute config that are passed as alongside each of those steps, right? And then you can have a config for the overall task, right? So I won't pass just the step for like I won't pass the like do the next step. I won't pass it a config which is for this step do plan only. Like I won't only plan object. I'll pass the whole step object for the config, right? And it will do whatever it wants to do, but it will have all the correct configs to do that thing, right? Does that make sense?
so right now in order to do that you can't, right? So it's kind of like a capabilities issue.
Well, there's just no way I could do it right now. There's just no information on what I can pass into that object, right? So for additional
see.
input, I could pass in all these different arrays of stuff, right? But there is
Mhm.
no way for another developer to know what the valid options are.
Yeah, and
Right.
then in this case, we in the additional info, in the info endpoint, we should also pass in various categories for tasks and steps. Then,
Yeah, because there's really two
Yeah,
ways
exactly.
I see to approach that, and the one is to assume that there are no types between tasks and no types between steps, and to assume that the config options would be universal across all of them, or we have to assume that they can be different, in which case they need to be declared.
yeah.
I think they can
Okay.
be different because I can tell you right now that they are different in our systems. There are
Nick,
some
would you
things
be
you
okay
can figure out.
with kind of like speccing it out with the open API spec?
Yeah, I could definitely help do that.
I would be
I
I'd be down to work with you, Nick, if you're interested. We could write an RFC for
yeah,
that.
yeah. Throw something on my calendar for next week. I'll be gone most of this week for bereavement, um, but next week I should be free.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, and
Yep.
this is helpful. So, but so it's okay. Let's move on to the topic of auth. Nick, you're mentioning that the auth should be a part of the main core protocol, which I see it because in their proposal they also have a null implementation, which is basically just a no op, right? Like nothing.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine for me, but separately, I think we should also kind of start thinking about like I guess other than auth, we've kind of talked about the plugin system allowing additional third-party protocol extensions. It like other than auth, there is still a need personally, I think, for a plugin system, and I think we should still build it. And then hooking into the info endpoint will obviously be a really, really good thing. Curious to hear your thoughts on this, Nick and Zane, and the rest of the Palav and Jay and Alex.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'll go first, just because I was named first. Auth is super important to us because we're about to do stuff that needs it, frankly. Using a standard for auth that is built into the agent protocol is really beneficial for us as well, and probably everybody else, because if it's part of the standard, people will follow it, right? Whereas if it's a plugin, well, 6 different versions of auth may appear, and that's fine and dandy. But for somebody like us who's trying to implement tools around it, it's a nightmare. Where I don't want to have to require, and everybody would, based off how we're building this, auth is your first plugin, right? Like it's just impossible to actually deploy an agent in any other way, right?
And you would end up with ones that are out of date or something, so you would have a lot of issues
Right.
there. So it makes more sense than to have it actually be a core element of the agent protocol.
Like our agent won't even reply to you if you're not offed. Like
Right.
period. So it won't know you. Like the agent won't even get the call.
So in this
Level of like.
in this proposal by Kaspar, he put the auth into the config options, which is what we were talking about. And so in that instance, where uh, where we have this config option with the tasks and then the type of tasks and the steps and the type of steps, an additional element to that on the same level as tasks and steps would be the auth. And then that would be passed with every request to the task and step endpoints, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm convinced that it doesn't need to be a header. I read the spec he wrote, and it seems like it's passed as an additional option. I think it could be a header, but I'm okay with this implementation as long as we add external or like a plugin auth way to say, hey, auth is handled through this plugin or auth is handled externally, right? Those were my, or like other basically for auth saying, yes, there is auth. No, it's not in these category options. Good luck. But otherwise, I really agree with the spec as he wrote it. It handles 99% of use cases. And I think it would work great.
The way that I was initially imagining auth is that it would be a separate endpoint. It's an auth endpoint, which is why like a protocol extension, I think plugin system makes sense. But if you're putting into the config options, then essentially what you're saying is on every you need to pass it in on every call, which I think also makes sense. But separately wouldn't like I think you need both, right? You need both a separate endpoint as well as being able to pass it in on every call. And so right now I'm only seeing being able to pass in on every call and not the separate endpoint.
So
The
a counter
separate
to that,
endpoint would be allowed. The separate endpoint will be allowed through the plugin system.
yeah, a counter to that is that our auth mechanism has nothing to do with the agent, like at
Mhm.
all. All you're
Mhm.
doing is passing us a JWT, and we verify it completely externally. You can't make a JWT with the agent, right? So some people might have auth in a different location, but I don't think that's part of the protocol's role is to specify how you do auth, merely how you tell us what you auth with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I see.
It might be worth to in the auth configuration options to link to some form of documentation maybe or something for authentication for your agent so that a client would be better able to obtain that authentication. I'm not
I agree
sure.
with that sentiment. Yes.
That's something that we could probably iron out in the RFC as well. And it could be something that just exists in the documentation, ideally, which is already part of the info endpoint. And I don't think anybody's against the elements that are in the info endpoint right now, like the description and the get URL and things like that. So that would make sense for it to exist in the documentation that you link. Whether that's just your GitHub README or a full documentation website, the authentication system needs to be documented there, so that a client could use it. But
That makes sense. Yeah, I think in this case then I agree with Nick's suggestion. And separately, like what's your thoughts on like a plugin system? Like, is it still needed? What are some of the other use cases for plugin system? We should kind of keep that in mind. And it seems like through this implementation of the auth, the plugin system will not be a part of the implementation. So yeah.
I could see a plugin for authentication and authorization with an agent, right? I could see that being a plugin, but not the actual like basically generating those tokens could be a plugin, right? Does that make sense? But the tokens and how they're passed themselves shouldn't be, because that's needed everywhere, no matter what. Does that make sense? Like I could see like you making a plugin for generate auth, a like agent protocol, and all that does is generate you an authentication token based off a bunch of different stuff.
I see.
But the critical thing is everybody's going to have different opinions on what that should be, right? Like for us, it may be your Firebase ID or whatever it's called, not Firebase, what is it, Flutter ID from our application, right? Like that's what we need to generate you an auth token. Whereas Microsoft may need your Teams ID. That's a terrible example, but you get the point, right? So that makes sense as a plugin because everybody will have a different implementation of that. But once you get past the making the token, everybody uses the same sort of authentication tokens, right? So that should be built in the protocol. Another thing that could be built in the protocol is like UI or not into the protocol, but into like, what's it called? Into the plugins is like UI endpoints, right? If you want to show a UI for your agent, well, heck, we could have an endpoint for that, but that should be a plugin. Stuff like that.
Mhm.
There's a
I
whole lot
wonder-
of different tools that
I
would be really
wonder
useful.
if it makes sense to also, so from our perspective, from the agent protocol perspective, for the schema, for the different types of authentication that's proposed there for basic bearer token, auth2, and JWT, essentially what we could do is sort of define what that would look like for the the endpoints themselves for posting to the tasks and steps and all that kind of stuff, or getting or anything like that. But I also wonder if we could replace that technically with like the name of the plugin. If the plugin system could be used to, like for instance, if your authentication system was more complex, like the idea here would be that bearer token or JWT would be something that the client would have to provide, assuming that the client has it. But if you wanted the client to be able to get it without being coded for that, like if we wanted a universal client to be able to authenticate, then we could create a plugin for that and then replace it in the auth config. Instead of bearer or JWT, it would be my auth plugin or something like that. Does that make sense?
So basically make a option there for plugin, and whenever you go to authenticate, you put the plugin name instead, and it
Right,
handles
exactly.
the auth for you. Yeah, we could totally do that. If we do that, we need to publish those first 5 options.
Yeah.
Um,
And configure them in the
and
spec.
right. But that could work. Frankly, I feel like plugins is like a huge amount of work that we have super not scoped at all. Whereas auth is a very small portion of that that's easily handled. And is clearly defined, But I think adding a category there for other and plugins is a good idea. Like our external and plugins.
Yeah.
Like that works great for me. So that way you can say, or like external plugin : this, right? Like this is the plugin you use for authentication.
Yeah.
And it will tell you everything you need to know. And then when you have that, it'll tell you to use one of the other 5 forms of auth or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basic
Yeah.
features and scalable via plugins. Exactly, Juan. I think that would work.
Okay. Well, so I'm gonna add a to-do. I commented on the issues. So I already gave the green light to the auth PR, and so we need to kind of they submitted a PR, so it's important that we review the PR. But separately, Nick, you and Zane are gonna be working on the schema for the config options, right?
Yes.
To separate out
There are
Tab.
25 with this PR.
types and step type. So 25 what? to this PR?
20 files changed. They
Yeah,
ran a
so
formatter over the code base.
yeah.
Okay.
And
We'll figure that out later. If you wouldn't mind assigning this PR to me in Tyndall.
oh, great.
And assigning the same one to assign Zane as well. We can
Okay.
look at it and assign the issue to us both as well, and then we can
Okay.
handle it. Zane, I don't want to sign you up for work you can't do. Is that cool with you?
I can't do it. What are you talking about?
If you're too busy, we're
Oh,
going
no.
into a holiday season. I don't want to sign you up.
I'm good. I'm
Cool. Just
I'm
make sure.
available.
Perfect. And then I'll
Uh,
probably get some of the other AutoGPT team to look at this to make sure it works with our stuff, because we'll be implementing this very soon on our side.
Awesome. Great. Okay, I will assign so the issues I'm hoping assigning the issue is, are you guys referring to the info endpoint issue?
I think he's referring to
Okay.
the PR number 80.
And the info endpoint issue.
NPR.
Both.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Awesome. Cool. That's all I have. Any additional things?
Yeah, we also had a proposal for a topic endpoint. I wanted to get that on the calendar to be considered.
Yeah, that makes sense. Topic endpoint.
Yeah, it's
So-
RFC number 77.
Yeah, so so the topic endpoint is kind of similar to the have you guys looked into the assistant endpoint? Assistant API
Yes.
from OpenAI?
Yeah.
Would
Not
you-
formally
would
as a
you-
company, but yes, I have, to be clear.
Okay, because I have yet to kind of like consolidate with OpenAI on like how they think about these type of things. It seems like there is a lot of parallel kind of isomorphisms between the two, and so it may be interesting to look into consolidating with them, or like have some sort of collaboration. The task, the high level task, the high level topic concept is kind of similar to like in Assistant API, they have thread, they have messages, they have runs, and run
Yep.
is kind of similar to our step, and then messages is similar to our task, and thread is similar to the topic, right?
I'm not super sure Swifty wrote this. My goal was just to make sure his proposal was on the docket to be discussed,
Mm-hmm.
as well as puts his proposal for bidirectional communication.
Yeah.
And basically to get both of them a time and place which they can appear to discuss their proposals.
Totally. Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm not super familiar with them.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it makes sense for Swifty to be here when we talk about it next.
Yep,
I
I'm
think
trying to get that scheduled.
he did create a issues page for that, right?
Yeah, that's issue number 77.
Awesome. Yeah. Maybe we can put it on the agenda for next time. Zane.
Awesome. Whenever you put that on the
Sounds good.
agenda, would you mind commenting?
Yeah.
Like on the issue, saying, "Hey, this is on the agenda for this week," whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we also have a similar one for number 44, opened by Rainier, from our team for bidirectional agent communication, which is kind of like a WebSockets-based communication protocol style. If we could get that on the docket as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
44. Cool. Awesome. So
And then
next
I
time,
also-
Nick, so next Tuesday at 6:30. Next Tuesday at 9:30 PST, which is your time. I think that's 10:30.
Yeah, 11:30 my time.
11:30.
But next Tuesday I'll be in Pennsylvania, so it'll be 12:30. Pretty cool.
Great. Yep.
But yeah, I just
and-
want to make sure those are on the calendar.
Uh-huh.
And I think we should probably work on doing that for every RFC. Is whenever somebody makes an RFC, reply with a discussion time.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that.
Because I think that would help us. Like I just thought about it while we were doing this. Like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then we
Yeah.
can see if they're there to propose it to the larger group for discussion and all that. It feels like it
Mhm.
makes us a more streamlined organization.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Cool, for sure.
That's all I got.
Awesome. Anyone, Alex, Jay, having anything to talk about?
Not for me. I was trying to talk earlier, but the micro wasn't working. Like I say, I'm just listening, just trying to understand the future of all this, and understand the sort of project. So yeah, just listening at the moment. Yeah, I'll just chip in when I've got something to say.
Great. And Jay?
For my part, I have a lot of reading to do, and I believe I can help with the Java side and see how can I contribute.
Sounds good. We can set
So
up a meeting time. Are you free tomorrow?
This week I'm kind of difficult, but I believe we can do it next week if you
Next
want.
week sounds good. We can set up a time for that and then go over things and get started with that. That'd be great.
Okay. Okay, great. So I have time to do my reading and some review.
Yeah, and let me know if you have any questions. I'm available for answering questions just about any time.
Thanks a lot, my friend.
awesome. Nice. Have a nice day. It was a good meeting, and hope you guys had a really happy Thanksgiving, and see you guys next week. And let's continue the discussion on the Discord.
Awesome.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.
Yeah.
You too.
Thanks.